Hi, I'm Christopher Hine, and today we're going to be talking about Kotegaeshi off a jab and why you should never ever try to do it. So this concept of I'm going to do some Aikido off of boxing techniques is a ridiculous idea. The techniques we do in Aikido are not the system. They're simply a technique in the system. And so I think a lot of people believe that they'll prove that Aikido works, or they'll prove that the Aikido techniques are good if they could do them off of boxing or they could do them off of wrestling. This is a silly idea, right? We have another simpler, much simpler answer for boxing and wrestling in Aikido than trying to do Kotegaeshi off a jab. So I'm going to get Josh out here. We're going to spend a bunch of time talking to you guys about what jabs and boxing kind of strikes are and why doing something like a Kotegaeshi or any kind of wrist technique is a bad idea off of those, and what you actually should be doing. And then we're going to talk about why you would actually need to do those wrist techniques as well. So all those things are true. You do need to do wrist techniques sometimes. There are techniques that you should use in Aikido to deal with boxing and wrestling, and there are really good techniques from other systems that should be used to get someone with who's trying to box you, but that's not the general interpretation that we're having. So I'm going to get Josh out here. We're going to go to work. Josh? All right, so first, let's talk about what would it look like if we did Kotegaeshi off of a jab. So throw that punch, and I'm going to do Kotegaeshi. Okay? So that's what it looks like. So if you're excited and you want to know what it would look like, that's what it would look like if it ever happened, ever. Okay? Now, I say it that way because I think it is a really important thing to understand here, which is Kotegaeshi is not a good technique to do off of any kind of straight punch, right? So when I was doing mixed martial arts and I was doing boxing, there were a couple simple ways that I dealt with someone throwing straight punches, right? One way was to outbox them, right? So if I was a better boxer than them, I would outbox them, right? So if we're like this and Josh is throwing jabs and I can see him coming, I'm outboxing this guy, right? So that's what I'm doing. I'm just going to outbox him. I'm going to use better boxing skills. Now, if I'm doing MMA and he's a better boxer than I am, I'm going to try to change the distances, right? So if he's throwing a jab, I'm going to try to change the distance. Now, from this position, a good rear clinch position like this, I'm going to try and dump him or throw him or choke him or all whatever stuff I'm up to, right? That's what I'm going to do from this rear position like this. So those are the two ways in mixed martial arts or in boxing that you would deal with someone who's throwing jabs at you. You'll either outbox them if you're a better boxer than them. If you are not a better boxer than them, well, if you were doing a boxing match, you would lose. But if you were doing MMA, then you would try and change the distance. And the way you would change the distance would be real simple, right? So if I'm throwing a boxing jab at Josh, right? So if I'm throwing that boxing jab at Josh, okay, either Josh is going to time it so he can get under it or around it, boom, okay? Then he's going to close the distance on me. And then from this position, he can control me, right? And he's got direct body control, so that's a really good thing to do. Now, if he is trying to do a Kotegaeshi off of that, and I'm throwing a proper jab, right? Which a proper jab goes out and comes back. That's what a jab does, right? So he tries to snatch my hand. This is what's going to happen. And then he's set up for a nice cross, right? Or overhand or whatever it is I'm throwing, okay? So when I'm throwing my jab, my purpose of my hand is to go out and come back really fast. All right, now, if you are someone who's real excited about the concept of doing Kotegaeshi off of a jab, you probably see that and you say, I am way ahead of you, Christopher Hine, because I would never, ever try to grab a hand out of midair. What I would do is I would get to a close position, as you were describing in MMA, and then I would do my Kotegaeshi. So let's see what that would look like. If Josh threw a jab, right, and I close the distance, right? So I've closed the distance here now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to work my way around into this position like this, and then I'm going to Kotegaeshi this guy, right? So if you're really into martial Aikido, you're probably saying that. You know, it's like, no, I would close the distance the same way as they do in MMA. That's a good way to get there. And then once I'm there, then I will throw my Kotegaeshi. Now, my question to that answer is, why on earth would you ever do a Kotegaeshi? Because it's so cool! So that's nice. It's cool. It's really cool. I agree. It's super, super cool. Maybe no one else agrees that it's super cool. But it's super cool to do that. The problem with it is, while I'm working my Kotegaeshi, why doesn't this guy punch me with his other hand? Okay? Now we could say lots of things like, well, if you use the right angle, or you could defend against that, or all kinds of stuff. But that, getting to this closed position, and then working to the hand, and then trying to dump him with the hand, is way more difficult than going here, picking him up, and dumping him, right? Way simpler, which is something we might see in MMA. Just shoot in there and dump him, right? There's a number of close quarter throws and takedowns I could use that would work infinitely better than trying to throw someone by their wrist. Now let's just think for a second of what throwing someone by their wrist means. It means that I'm going to hold his wrist, this tiny bit of his body, and then I'm going to throw his whole body with his wrist. Now you might say, well, Christopher Hine, in fact, this will hurt so much that he will fall down and fly through the air magnificently. Now that might be true if he was real scared of getting his wrist hurt or something. He might choose to jump over. But if he's a serious guy, I could probably break his wrist and he's still going to pound me with the other hand, right? And he's got a broken wrist, but he's still smashing me to death with that hand. And so why would I try to throw someone here? If I had a full body clinch like this, now he can't hit me with his other hands, can't kick me, can't do anything, and I can dump him, right? So that's a way better way. So something we learn in Greco-Roman or something would be a better style throw than trying to do a Kotegaeshi, okay? Now you might say, all right, but I have not studied Greco-Roman wrestling or MMA. So for me, I am an Aikido guy and I do Aikido all the time. And because I do Aikido all the time, then I want to do Kotegaeshis because that's what I'm trained to do. I'm superior at Kotegaeshis. I'm terrible at other kinds of throws, right? The problem is what you should do is invest 2 months in doing MMA style clinch takedowns, because those 2 months will make you way more successful than 10 years of trying to do Kotegaeshi off of that situation. The reason is the technique's just low percentage. Kotegaeshi is a low percentage throw for trying to throw a guy with his wrist, right? Much higher percentage to get a suplex or something, right? To come and grab the guy and throw this guy. Much, much better than trying to throw him with his wrist. So that's what my answers to all those things would be, okay? Now, let's look at what Aikido answers are to a jab. So that was why you shouldn't try to do Kotegaeshi off of it. And so now you say, but I'm an Aikido expert, and I don't want to go study MMA or anything else. So what am I going to do against very realistic attacks like jabs? Let's look at what the jab does. Okay, the jab principally does 3 things, right? So if I'm throwing a boxing jab, I'm either making distance, right? So if I've got long arms and I don't want this guy getting close to me, or if we're in an MMA style situation and this guy wants to clinch with me, I'm going to use that to push him back. So this is what I'm doing. I'm pushing him back with my jab, right? So I'm keeping the distance I want, okay? So that's one of the primary things I'm doing. So if a boxer, if you're ever facing a boxer and they're using a jab, one of the reasons they might be using a jab is because they're trying to make some distance for themselves and set their ideal distance, right? I.e. to box you, right? So if I'm a long-armed boxer particularly, I want this guy just about this range. Now, when I'm getting him at this range, that means if I'm a long-armed boxer, he's not getting me back. It means if he's a grappler and I'm not a grappler, he can't grapple me, because from here, you see, hard for him to reach out as far as you can. Look at that. Very hard for him to reach and get me. So that might be a reason I'm using my jab, is because I'm trying to set distance, okay? Another reason I'm going to use my jab is because I'm trying to feel distance out. That means I'm trying to set up multiple shots. So what I might start doing is firing my jab out, not with the intent to super hurt him. I mean, if I hurt him, that'd be great, but my intent is a quick jab. So I touch him and I'm getting right there, right? So I'm getting right there, okay? And that's what I want. And then I use that to follow up with combination shots. So once I know I can tap him with my jab, I know a cross and a hook might set up immediately after, right? So I'm here and I go bang, 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 and it's hard to do all this on camera, but that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm using it to feel out distance. I'm setting a distance for myself so I can continue boxing. So number 1, make distance. Number 2, set distance and feel out distance. That's the second reason I might use a jab. Third reason I would use a jab is to fluster and frustrate my opponent, right? So that way they start making stupid mistakes and I can get them exactly in the way I want them, right? So I'm just kind of popping him around a lot so he starts making bad choices and starts getting frustrated, and that might be why I use a jab. Okay, Aikido's answer to a jab is always the same, and that answer is to distance, right? So our proper mai is this. It's impossible for anyone, even if I have super long arms, right? I can't jab Josh from here, right? I cannot jab Josh from here. If Josh could always maintain that distance, then I cannot jab Josh, okay? So what would I do as a boxer? Well, I would try to creep in here and get in and then, boom, jab him. Now, every time Josh sees me creeping, Josh is not interested in Aikido and punching me back. So every time Josh sees me creeping, he creeps out. Okay, that's it, right? He creeps out. Okay, now look, I can't jab him. Impossible to jab him. Now that might not seem and feel as cool as a Kotegaeshi, but tactically, it's a great decision. I cannot jab him. If you are trying to always keep distance, it will be impossible for them to jab you. And not only impossible, but why would they want to jab you? It's not doing their 3 objectives, right? So he doesn't need to make distance. I wouldn't need to make distance with my jab because he's already far away. So I'm not going to use it for that. I'm not going to use it to set distance because it's not setting, I'm not touching him. So I might try to keep creeping up on him, but he's going to keep creeping out. I'm going to creep in, he's going to creep out, and this is going to go on for a long time. So that would be bad to use my jab to set that distance. That's bad. And I'm not going to fluster him with it because he's not trying to come in to get me. He's not trying to set up his own shot, so I can't fluster and bother him with my jab. So I'm just probably, as a boxer, not going to use a jab in this situation. So that might make you say, well, yeah, but come on. What you're going to do is run him down and then punch him. And you're right. But running him down and punching him is not a jab. Running him down and punching him is not a jab. Okay, now I'm saying this in this weird way because look, man, if I'm flustered, and we'll go mega slow so we can stay in frame, but if I'm flustered and I can't get a jab, I'm going to start to run at this guy to throw big shots at him. That's what I'm going to do because he won't stand still for me to jab him. So I'm just never going to get a jab off. So the jab is not really something in Aikido, with Aikido theory, using proper distancing, set a good mind, that you're going to have to deal with. And a boxer wouldn't choose to use a jab against you. Now, if I'm a MMA guy, I might run in to grab you and then hit you, all kinds of other things, but that's not a jab. It's not what a jab is. So why are Aikido people so obsessed with doing an Aikido technique off of a jab? Because it's so cool! The reason is because it's so cool, right? It's that simple. It's so cool to do that. And it makes us feel, as Aikido people, like we're vindicated. The reason for that is the jab is the #1 punch in boxing, right? And you know, probably a lot of people could disagree with that. But in truth, the jab is used constantly in modern boxing. It's used tactically and strategically all the time to do the things that I listed that it can do, right? It bothers people, it sets distance, and it makes distance, right? So it does all those things really, really nicely. So because it's so important to boxing, a jab is so important to boxing, Aikido people think, well, if I could do Kotegaeshi off of a jab, then I would really be able to show that Aikido can beat boxing. And that is so cool! So we really have to stop and set ourselves aside and go like, am I really worried about being so cool? Or am I actually more worried about surviving a situation or being able to handle myself or take care of myself in rough situations? And if you want to learn to box or wrestle, you should do that. And so if you want to overcome someone who's jabbing at you, learn to box, learn to wrestle. If you're doing Aikido, the answer is real simple. You will never give them the distance to jab. So you might have to deal with other kinds of punches and grappling stuff, but jabs is not really something you're going to have to worry too much about because it won't naturally come up in the situations we're trying to do, right? So if they pin you against a wall or something, they'll hit you, but those aren't going to be jabs. They're going to be them hitting you against a wall. And we can talk about that stuff in later series. Okay, now a really important question, last question you might say is, well, then I guess Kotegaeshi is just stupid, right? And so why would we even have Kotegaeshi? Why do we even practice Kotegaeshi at all? So let's take a second and look at that. And remember, the reason's not... Okay, so aside from being so cool, there's a really good reason for something like Kotegaeshi. Now, it goes back to our historic foundation, right? So what Aikido looked towards, right? And so understand that the techniques in Aikido are not unique. Those techniques can be found in Koryu Jiu-Jitsu, that's old-fashioned Jiu-Jitsu, and they existed long before the founder was born. They're old-school techniques, and they come from war stuff, right? So what was happening on a battlefield, and people had weapons on a battlefield, right? So they had weapons, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that it would be any less valuable in today's world when today people also get upset and use weapons to attack each other, right? And the weapon might be a knife or a gun or something, also might just be a frying pan or a vase or whatever's handy that someone picks up and wants to smash you with. Okay, now, you can see logically that Josh could essentially use the jab with a knife, right? So he could jab at me with that knife, right? So he's popping it in, popping it out, right? Okay, and that's great, all right? Now, as an Aikido person, again, my initial way of dealing with this is always to set distance. So I just want to stay out of distance, right? And he's trying to use that jab. Now, it would be nice if I could disarm this guy. Now, if we used my previous solutions for this, which is what I would use in MMA or boxing, right? Now, if I try to outbox this guy, so even imagine I'm a better boxer than Josh. And so every time Josh throws that, I beat him to the punch, right? I'm beating him to the punch. Do you see what's happening? A, he's got reach on me all of a sudden, right? Okay, B, he's now killing me with this knife, and I'm just hitting him. So, maybe I'm lucky and I knock him out, but every time we trade shots, I am getting stabbed, right? And he's got a reach advantage and a major power advantage now that in a boxing situation we wouldn't have. So if I'm trying to use my boxing skill to beat a guy with a knife and I'm trying to out-jab him, it's going to be bad for me, right? So that's not a very good solution. Trying to use boxing against a guy with a knife, not the best. It might work. I might get lucky and nail this guy, but if I don't get lucky, I'm going to get cut. And even if I do get lucky and knock him out, I'm probably still going to get cut, and that might be bad for me later on. Okay, now how about an MMA style situation, right? Which the idea is just to slip that guy, right? So he comes in, and I'm just going to slip it. I'm going to get to this kind of position. Okay, now I can totally dump him, but watch what he's going to do with that knife when I go to dump him, right? That knife's going to start coming in to get me, right? So what I'll have to do from that kind of position, from that kind of clinch, is immediately check the arm. I would slip it, just like in MMA, and then I would get to this kind of position, and then I could do something from here. Now, the ability to throw with Kotegaeshi didn't change. Just because he's got a knife, that didn't change. What did change is, by doing the Kotegaeshi, I now wrench the weapon out of his hand, right? So what happened is, whether he falls or not, and this might happen, when I said, oh, you might say that like, oh, it hurts so bad that they throw themselves through the air. It could hurt so bad that he throws himself through the air. But even if he doesn't, what's happening is I get a huge power advantage by having both of my hands on the weapon and turning the entirety of my body around the weapon and wrenching the weapon out of his hand. Okay, so it's not really to try to throw his whole body with this little wrist. It's to use the power of my whole body to wrench the weapon out of his hand. And now we see Kotegaeshi has a really good purpose. Now, catching it out of the air is still going to be really challenging. But essentially, following that knife in and then being able to get a hold of it, or just like you would in MMA, establish a basic clinch position and then get to that knife hand from there, is what we would want to do. So that's why you would need Kotegaeshi. Other Aikido techniques will work the same way, right? Sankyo, if we got in this position, Sankyo can work the same way, right? So I can use tons and tons and tons of Aikido techniques in that same way. Why would I need to do them? Because there's something of a priority in this hand, right? So something that's going to kill me if I don't take it out of this hand. So that's why I would do those kind of techniques. And that's where those techniques come from. Old school jiu-jitsu, which wasn't worried about unarmed stuff, it was worried about armed stuff, weapons. So I need to be able to control that weapon. So that's a whole picture of why you really should stop trying to do Kotegaeshi off a jab, right? It's a silly idea that we don't need to have. Now, if we did it, it would be so cool. But come on, does anyone really care? No one really cares, right? So let's talk about Aikido in a practical sense. And if you want to be particularly martial, right, your Aikido is very martial, then don't worry about trying to do it off of a jab. Worry about how Aikido fits naturally in its own context. I'm Christopher Hine. Thanks for watching.